Here's the bearing in this motor shot. And we're going to want to remove the radiator. You're going to want to take off this side first because the filler neck will rest right here in this angle, make it easier for you to remove. Then we're going to remove the front grille. After we take out the headlights, we could get at these two bolts, 9/16. From under here, there's two more 9/16 bolts going this way. Then there's a row of them on the top for the core support, and there's two bolts the opposite direction in here. We drain the oil, we pull the oil pan and pump and pick up. You can see 3 simple bolts, 1 simple nut, wire out of the way, disconnected our belts, removed our alternator. We have disconnected our throttle linkage and cable. We've removed the vacuum booster cable, the extra ground wire. We've removed the battery cables. We've removed our temp sensor and our coil, all of our wires, and we've set it back over there out of the way. We've removed our choke cable if you have one. Removed our heater lines, all that good stuff. Bolted our exhaust manifold flange to the exhaust here. We've removed this bolt here for the mount, and this bolt in there for the mount. We've pulled our power steering lines out of the way. Our oil pressure line, fuel lines out the way. Boom, starter disconnected, pulled out. Really easy. We're gonna bop out these 6 bolts. You're gonna take them bolts out that the clutch is bolted onto, or your torque converter. Then you will take a wrench and rotate the engine on the front here, or insert a pry bar here on the other side, and you will rotate it and take the other bolts out. All right, now we're going to hook up our hoist, support the weight of the engine, put slight tension on it, and then we're going to remove these 6 bolts. All right, as you can see, we supported the bell housing with some chains around the frame there. We put a couple of bolts through the dust cover. All we did is we simply hooked up our engine stand on the equalizer. Real easy. The exhaust manifold here, these 9/16. This one here is usually the one that's broken off. Be careful with this one. You see how we're keeping things organized with all the bolts that go with it. Okay, we'll remove our valve covers. Scrape off the gaskets. We'll remove our intake manifold here. It's heavy. Now once again, we've cleaned up this surface. We'll have to do a little better job, but we've got all the major stuff, so when we pull our cover here, we don't end up blowing a bunch of heavy grit inside. These 4 9/16 bolts, and we'll pull our carburetor right off. There we go. Let's see, we got some down in this one. You're going to need to save this one from your old engine. It's a little different on the Scouts. Now we'll remove the bolt using our impact and a 15/16 socket. Okay, using a socket or a spacer of some sort, we're going to want to use our gear puller. I have it set up on 2, good enough. Once we've removed the 9 bolts and the 4 from the oil pan, we could then remove our cover. You might have to give it a little tap. This one came off easy. The thing you'll need to save is the passenger side motor mount. If you're upgrading from a 4-cylinder, the driver's side mount will not fit.
Well, already the head's looking for shape.
Just take them off evenly, crack them a little bit. Okay, you can see I've got my rocker assembly here off. Keep your lifters and push rods organized. Also, there's your head bolts. There's the tightening sequence. All the torque specs I like to write down to keep it handy. Okay, then we'll just crisscross from the outside in.
Here's your head gasket. Set this aside for a second. We're going to want to check this for any signs of leakage between the cylinders here. outside oil passages, coolant passages, all what have you. And there's your cylinder head fresh off the block. See, this rear cylinder on the other side was carboned up.
We label them. The valves have to be lapped and go back in the seat they came out of. We clean everything up. We check for cracks. You can go as far as cleaning them up and having them magnafluxed. This is the most common place to crack. Now, as you can see, the valve guide in here, this is changeable. It's pressed in. This is a 1970 head. A lot of the newer heads, you have to ream it, hone it, and there's a brass or bronze insert that goes in there. Alright, we have to break them loose first, so we'll place a socket that fits over. We tighten it down, and we hold the valve in place in the back. Pop it loose, and out comes. There's the second one in there. A little difficult to get out. There's two. So now, there's our spring and our retainers. Here we go, and you'll check if it's already been rebuilt. It might have these shims here for valve spring height. These all have the same shim. Sometimes they're doubled up. We're going to check again, but usually things are where they belong. Seal there. Okay, we're going to want to clean up with the wire wheel in here before we remove the valves. We want to be careful of the seats. This seems to have the factory marks just like the head. You know, we checked to make sure it was straight, and it is. At least 3/1000ths within, because we can't fit it underneath anywhere on the straight edge. If this was already decked, you could, the max you could take off these cylinder heads by the factory says 10/1000ths. Okay. Now we're going to do a little bit of porting. See that little line? We have an even smaller little bit line on the valves, and that means we have a good seat. So we're going to clean these up a little better, lap them up really quick. Alright, quick bath. We're ready to lap them. We attach our suction cup to our valve as so. Okay, we have coarse and fine. We'll put a couple dabs of oil on the coarse side, mix it up to a nice paste, and this is like sandpaper gel. So what we're going to do here is just put this on, put a little on the valve seat, and we will simply hear it. Hear how it cuts, and then you could hear it actually seated. We're going to clean this off after we do this one, and then we'll hit it again really quick with fine. Now we're not trying to grind with this, we're seating it further and further down into the valve bowl here, and you will end up getting a poor hot even seal with heat transferring too much and expansion and things changing sizes, and whoa. Intake valve. Right when you hear it change sounds like that, you're done. Remember, if it needs any more than that, your heads go to the shop. Okay, we clean them off, little brake cleaner. Okay, wipe them down. We don't want any lapping compound in our guides. It's going to lap our guides. What we want to do, maybe put a drop of oil or two in there and finish our lapping with the fine. So as you can see, we have a nice even line going around. That's getting near the high side of ideal, which this is about ideal. It's that nice thin even gray line all the way around the valve. Three to 5 year old head job. Every other valve looked brand new, except for these two looked slightly worn. And that's because the higher temperature. Okay, this is trouble because it keeps pumping into the air, not scavenging properly, meaning the heat's remaining built up in here. And what happens, we had these two bolts were discolored from heat, and that's what that little flapper valve is on your exhaust. It would force one side to pump through here at low RPMs, heat up the intake manifold. Okay, so you didn't get any little bit of gas pooling. You could get the older gasket that doesn't have the passage for it. That'll block it off. Now as we're cleaning it up, before I get too crazy, you could see the lines here. You could see where the gasket was. You could see where the opening is. And you could see how each one's a different size. Look at this one especially. Look at how rough that casting is. One bolt in the center just to hold it. Line up our gasket so it's centered, okay? And we're going to trace around here with a pencil. Now, some people will get crazy and make a little mold to check each one. You could use fingers and feelers. You want to make sure all the way down there these are all the same. On the newer emission heads, they'll have the portholes, and plugged or not, they have a bigger hump to grind down than here. There's a hump there too. There's a little hump here you take out. You want to make sure they're even. They weren't. You can see how it's all pretty smooth. That was with a little milling bit. Okay, I'm going to go in there right now in a second and see here it's a little concaved. The straight bit's not going to get in there. This little one will get in there. We'll clean it up, polish it a little better. And going from that, I mean, yeah, kind of can't go wrong here. Okay, and some people will go as far as opening these bowls up, alright, to flow better. Okay, but really, and they'll have a flow bench. Okay, it's just not, it's not a race engine. And even if it was, those are the last things you would do. The least gains you're going to get out of the vehicles from this, from the engine, is from that. Okay. You also want a rough surface on the intake ports. Okay. And here a little bit, it helps mix the fuel and the gas better at low RPMs when it's not such a high velocity and mixing better. Okay. Now polishing the exhaust side is good. The smoother it is, the less carbon's going to build up. We don't have a surface for it to stick to. We want it to flow out the tailpipe and into the atmosphere, not be inside of our clean engine. We're just going to come in here and ease it in. And keep going until it looks like this. Alright. This time I'm wearing a rag tied around my face and my glasses because last night my nose was bleeding. This dust is very fine and everywhere. On the outside you could see I started cleaning up the runoff surface where there was casting, as you could see here. Just going to port match the intakes. We're not going to go in there at all. Cleaned out just the edges, deburred a little bit. I just kind of eyeballed, opened them up. They're just cooling passages. This is the evil passage. I only went under an inch in all the way around. It almost seemed like it didn't need it until I looked at the manifold. See, the intake manifold is smaller lengthwise. So there it was. Here's what it should look like. Just a little bit on the inside, you can see. Gasket to gasket matched. We're going to do the same on our exhaust manifold. Now, as you can see, lining up in the marks where it was. Center bolts tight. The end ones are loose. Make sure it's centered. You can see the exhaust manifolds aren't as bad as the heads were at all. As you can see, the middle valves have shorter distance than the end valves. Now, if the whole idea of porting it was to balance it out so it runs smoothly and evenly, okay, so ideally we want headers. But we're just going to, we traced our little tiny line, we're going to open it up a little bit, and that's all we're going to do until we have header money. Okay, like I said, we're not getting crazy here. Now, you're going to want to do these manifolds last. They're going to be a little harder on the bit. The only other thing we could really do is see this oil passage, how there's that little ridge there. Clean it up a little bit. Okay. It's best to have it as concave and open as possible. Alright. The intakes are actually pretty nice. The exhaust has just this little ridge here. You could smooth that out. I'm not going to. You're getting dangerous messing around in there if you're very close to here. Alright. They say when you are doing this in here to stay a 1/4 inch away from the valve mating surface, no matter what you're doing. There is the port right here. This goes through. This is the very first emissions thing they ever came out with. Late 60s. And it comes through to this one exhaust port here. That's the thing. Why I didn't work on my exhaust bowls? No matter what, we're going to have this one that's different from the rest of them. So, this ain't filled in. Ideally, we would have a straight 345 head or 304, 392, not the E head. Okay, the old heads didn't have this port. They had the dome pistons that filled up inside the different compression chamber. Got you a higher compression already. This is emission stuff. Hey, we're going to wash these up one more time. I want to show you, it's funny how things don't flow evenly. I was talking about, you can see being the worst one, how wide that was, and it's right on the edge. You could see that seat, it's a little bit wider than the others. And you could see this is another old used valve I had. I lapped that one right up to the seat. It's really at the end of being tolerable, but this one is not tolerable at all. This one being perfect. This cylinder head turned out to be perfect. We wash it, dry it, spritz it down with some mystery because it will rust instantly. We install our valves, set them in where they came from, and we also cleaned it with brake parts cleaner too, even after the soap and drying it. We'll install shim, shiny side up. It should be labeled, rotator thinger, and we will put our spring assembly for the exhaust valve in the compressor. We're going to install our O-ring here. We want it on the second one, and there's a flat surface. We don't want it rolled over or twisted. And then we'll set our springs in place, and this little retainer goes right above the O-ring. See? We'll pop our first little clip up inside there. Get them both in there. tapered end in. Okay, we feel that they're seated in place, and then we can pull back a little bit to hold in place as we unloosen, because we need two hands. Okay, that's it. Now we'll scrape it up, clean it up. We'll take our feeler gauge set here. We should not be able to fit this anywhere, and we can't, of course. There shouldn't be any more than 3 thousandths across. We're good. You know, I come across on angles everywhere, check it back and forth. Let's check the other side. So far everything seems good except for this damage here in this piston. I'm a little down about that. Well, the cylinder walls aren't scratched at all from it. It looks like a little see, little line scratched in there, whatever. They look okay on the crank side here. Now what we want to do is clean both these surfaces up with some solvent. Put a dab of grease on our dried surface. Put on a little piece of plastic gauge. Connecting rods only go back in together one way because they're matched. They're broke. See how that lines up? Now without rotating the engine, we're going to crank this right back down to torque specs. 600 inch-pounds or 50 foot-pounds. Here we are at 600 inch-pounds. As you can see, we're right here in between 2 thousandths and 1 thousandth. So we're about 1500 clearance. We're right on spec. Now what we're going to want to do here is we're going to rotate this crank a third of the way. So we'll put another strip here after we clean this off on both sides. We'll test it here and once more on the other side, so we have 3 sections around the crank, and that way we will know if it's round. And as you can see here again, we're at the same exact, about thousandths and a half in between the 1 and 2. Now we can't go all the way around and get this one 3 places because we can't get at the bolts, but that's a pretty good indicator without testing it with our micrometer, as we will do obviously too, but we're trying to order parts right now and I'm showing you how to do this. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and we're going to do the same thing for the crank. Obviously we're going to have to use a larger torque wrench because these need to be torqued down to about 80. We might as well go here and pop out our connecting rod. Now we're simply going to guide this down so we don't scratch anything and push it out. Catch it down here. Check the ID with these torqued back down without the bearings to make sure it's round, and we could check the journal. We could check our surfaces here for round as well. Being very careful not to scratch. Right, we check our pistons are all round. The bottom of each cylinder, 4 5/10, 5. Okay, we got to write these numbers down. Then we'll check them this way. The bottoms are 4 5/10, 4 5/10, 4 5/10, 4. That's the same readings we had on the other side. They were all 5, 4 5/10. The front one being 4. A little ovaled out at the very bottom in the front 2 cylinders. We're going to do the same for the tops. coming across. Four. 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 So that means we're about 1/1000th of an inch out of round and under 1/1000th inch of taper top to bottom. That means we can move on to removing our camshaft and checking them tolerances. Okay, something to study it. Bops right off counterclockwise. Real simple. You know, we bop in a couple bolts here and we evenly turn each side and it pushes off the shaft like a puller. So once we get to that last little bit, we're off. We're going to remove these two screws here. Okay, this is what gets replaced if you had any end plate. Could place our crankshaft somewhere safe. It's heavy. The opposite direction of the little tang. And they come right out. Okay, these get stuck in there, they get tricky to pull out sometimes, but it's also easier to get it upside down so we could support it better. They do make little corn on the cob holders for the ends. Now we could use our bore gauge to check our camshaft bearings IDs, and we could use our micrometer to check our ODs here. The camshaft is under spec. We get oversized bearings and have the camshaft journals ground down to fit. Okay, so we're gonna scrape up these surfaces and clean off all this material. We're gonna scrape off all the heavy stuff we could get at. Now that we're completely stripped down, use some oven cleaner, clean the block off again. I know I didn't pull them little plugs I pointed out yet, but we're gonna have to clean it yet again. I'm gonna pull out the camshaft bearings, hone it out, clean it again, clean it again. Every little bit of dirt is one little piece of dirt that has a chance of sneaking inside when you're not looking, right? Alright, now we're gonna dry it off with air and hit it with a light mist of mystery oil to keep her from rusting. Okay, so we're gonna dry it again. We're gonna mist it down with the mystery oil. Alright, this is Eric the Wrench again here, back in the shop. We're gonna finally hone out our cylinders here. Alright, we wiped down our cylinders with some fine mineral oil, cleaned everything out. had your engine been older and more worn, see how you could kind of see that line there? That's where the top of the ring would come to at about 420 thousandths of an inch from the top of the deck to the top of the ring. Now what we're going to do here, follow the instructions here that came with our flex home. And take it one extra step and soak our new toy in a little bit of oil to get it broken in a little faster. Works a little better that way. Alright, so we took a rag in our little jug, we soaked our hone in, and we sopped up all the cylinders with oil. They're dripping wet now. We'll take our drill here. We're all chucked up here, and it's 550 RPM drill. Okay, we're in the recommended range. You could see it's oversized. Okay, now you want it moving when you insert it, and we want up 20 to 45 strokes, 20 to 45 seconds of 1 to 2 strokes per minute. So what we're going to do here is real simple. If you're worried you can't do this by hand, if you could tap your foot, you could do this. You set your little app on your phone. Okay, we set our little metronome app to 120 beats per minute, and we're going to go in and out starting before we do, and we're going to count 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And we're going to count that 40 times. That's going to be 40 seconds. Up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. Okay? Real simple. I'm going to set this somewhere so I could have both hands to keep steady. Thumbs up. Before let's find out what happened, huh? Wow. But there overall is a nice crosshatch pattern. Nice 45-degree angle. Okay, we're going to clean it up a little better. People like to have things overboard and all that stuff, oversized even if it's in spec of round. But really those scratches are insignificant. Scratches like that will wear into the surface anyway with the piston rings in there. So it will all seat itself in there real nice. You know, don't forget, we could get crazy here and we could easily spend, you know, $1,000 master rebuild kit, $1,000 at the machine shop, not even including the heads, and we could start getting crazy cams in here and crazy things that, you know what, some of us don't have a money tree. And this is fine. This engine probably could have just had some new pistons slapped in it and ran, but we're going to make it like new. We're going to hit it one time really quick because we don't want to exceed, we don't want to take too much off. While we're technically only deglazing, it is lightly taking a tiny bit off the surface. Alright, and remember, keep everything you don't want covered in oil out of the shop. Now that we know the swing of it, now that we're in the beat, we're going to do this again. Let's go again. Here we go. Now I've wasted a whole gallon of oil here, so make sure you have enough. Wet up our stones. Unwet our hands. Let's try to give it a fast one. We're going twice as fast like they said we could do. Let's see what it does. Yeah, I worked that front cylinder a little extra. We're cheating it a little bit. That was the scratched up one. Wow, am I happy with that last little bit of fast up and down. You can see that is now a perfect 45 crosshatch. Before it was about 40. Alright. That looks real good. Now that's that finish you see in all them fancy hot rod magazines and whatnot. Anywho. You could see them scratches are almost gone now. While we could very carefully keep going and probably remove them, we still are taking off a little bit of material, and you will have oversized your cylinders to an odd size where you can't get special pistons or rings for. Remember, we don't want to take off too much. Little scratches like that are going to come on their own very shortly after operation anyway, during break-in. That's what break-in is. As the rings go up and down in those grooves, see, contrary to the beginner's belief, you don't want a smooth cylinder. That's a worn cylinder. These grooves here, this plateaued finish and these crosshatch grooves, they hold oil. Okay? Now you can still see little bits of grit and stone in here. Alright? We're going to have to clean this engine off again real good. Give it a good last soapy bath. And then clean it with a little detergent after the air hose. After we do our cam bearings here. And then it's time for reassembly. 。  . 。  . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . . 。 . . 。 . 。 Then it's time for reassembly. there's our bad one. That was our worst cylinder. There's that little bit of top. You can see that little bit of damage right there. That's where it's shiny there because that's where some aluminum brazed itself to the wall. Soldered itself to the wall, whatever you want to call it. It's above the ring landing. We removed it all. We very carefully removed it all because we didn't want it remelting inside of our cylinders. But you can see from what it was before, that's exactly what we're looking for. Now, just for the heck of it, I'll retest it with the bore gauge just to see exactly how much we removed for my own reference and numbers and brain having to know everything, even though it doesn't matter. Well, it does matter. It does matter to know if we're going to go beyond the limits. All right, here we are now to install these cam bearings. We set up the kit as do the Lyle instructions tell us to. We check that our bearings, and we know now, because I just checked for you, that they are under 65, which means we use the rubber sleeves that are already installed, as opposed to the extra ones that came with it. As we tighten up, this sleeve expands, grabs the bearing, and then we can pull it right out. Drive it right out, excuse me. So what we'll do is the rear bearing first, so we don't scratch any surfaces that aren't being changed, and we will slide this through from the front carefully to the back. Okay, here we are. Now the bearing seats, it fits all the way up against it here, being that it's our smallest size. They do go smallest back to front. And what we will do is we will turn this with the cone resting in here to ensure that everything is straight on the front. Back in your hole. We'll take our little 7/8 inch wrench, tighten this down here so we hold the front. Now that that's nice and snug, we could just bop this right out. We're going to take our 7/8 inch wrench. We're installed here. We're tight. We're tight. Now we could tighten by hand by the end of the handle. We're hand tight. I'm going to tap the bearing right out the back while holding the cone so we don't do it unevenly. Coming out. It's out. Then we will take our wrench again. I'm holding it to support it, so I'm not turning it against anything. It's good practice. We'll remove our bearing. Here we go. This bearing is destroyed. Everyone said the cam bearings were the first to go on these. Now we just simply do the next one in line. Let's make life easier. Nice even dead little taps. Center. We don't want any scratches that oil could escape out instead of going through the bearing hole. This one's worn, not as bad as the rear one was. And it looks like the last three we're going to have to step down to the smaller size tool. Oh, that works too. Alright, Eric the Wrench back here. Had to learn a little trick off of a video on the internet. I'd be worried about stuff you learned on the internet, but this one worked. Set it right in the bottom. Not on the lip, but in the cup. Pop in the bottom. And the top rolls right out. But as you could see, it was all pretty good. We've popped out our plugs. We've cleaned with brushes. Alright, then we're going to take our little wire brush cup. After we oil our tool, we're going to clean up this deck one last time. Wire brush is a little safer than the discs. The cup isn't going to take chunks out on you. We're not going to use a regular tap to try to clean up the threads on a tapered plug. It's a pipe fitting. It's a different type of tap. We're just cleaning. A little kerosene on the thread. And don't forget, we have bottom taps and middle taps. We want a bottom to get all the way to the bottom. If we don't chase these threads, we're going to have an improper torque reading. So it's getting pretty late here. You don't need to see how to use a brush or wash something with soap. An oven cleaner, we're going to hose it down. These plugs here I'm about to pull out, they're a pain. They make square sockets. Don't have them. It worked. Alright, and that worked too. I cut the end off of a screwdriver to sacrifice here, but I got a tool for installing plugs later. And when it's late and you're running out of tools to cannibalize, I was able to tap on an E12 star socket to get these little square plugs, and there you go. Now, as you could see, I very lightly just chamfered, deburred the edges. We didn't touch the surfaces. I cleaned up this little bit here, just a little bit, because it was built up like a little bit of a dam from the casting. So we got rid of it, let the oil flow in a little better. It made it fine without it, but you never know. Even things like here, we cleaned up the edges from where the casting was, and here a little bit too. You know, any one of those little bits of burr sticking on the end could have came off at any time and ruined the engine. It's not under warranty anymore 40 years later. And however many years later you're watching this video. So you can see that's pretty well cleaned up. We'll hit it with some solvent one last time. Okay, we're going to want to mist this with oil in here so it doesn't rust after we do that. Alright, I've gone as far as plugging this hole, blowing through here, cleaning out all the oil passages one last time. You could see it came with everything we need except for this plug here I had to supply myself, this little brass one. Okay, we've installed our front plugs here with a little bit of gasket shellac, wipe clean the excess. We install our rear plug, same thing. We're going to install our upper plugs here, and I like to fill this hole here. Fill our passages with a little bit of assembly lube. And on the outside I just used a little bit of gas-proof pipe dope. And we'll install these till the threads stretch and seal. And we simply tap in our freeze plugs, lightly seating them at start, and then using a socket that fits inside, and we tap them down until the edge is just below where the bevel ends, evenly all the way around. That way we know they're seated properly. Okay, our bearings here have been wiped up with assembly lube. You can see they're labeled where they go. We lined up the oil hole with the line on here to make it easy to see. You can see we have number 5 here. We're going to put number 5 all the way through. Reassembling tool once inserted into position, because we can't fit it through the other cam journals, we're going to want to, in a million ways, a million times, double check that we are lined up with this hole and this hole. That's how our whole system oils through there. Okay, double check. It's your last chance. You can actually see the oil channels in here, helps a little bit. Now we're going to tap it in just far enough so that hole lines up. We don't tap it in too far or not enough. So, holding this cone as a guide and holding one hand, we're simply going to okay. You could see down in the hole that there's no more little eclipsing in there. As a matter of fact, it looks like it could use half of a tap, a little bit more to line up. It's about perfect. As you can see, the bearing still sticks out a bit inside here. It doesn't drive all the way in the back, but it does wind up being about flush with the back of that little channel there. And double checking once again, once it was out, I could see that I need to give it one last little tap, so I went ahead and did so. Over here, we line this up, large hole at the top, okay, and small hole goes to feed the oil. Can you see the hole? Goes to feed the oil, as you could see up in there. You're going to want to make sure those holes are lined up. Large hole, small hole, you're going to have trouble. So, same as the back, we're going to tap it in. Check it, tap it, check it. So we're all good. Now, once we get to the last one here, we're going to put on the short handle. And once we have carefully inspected and cleaned our camshaft again, we simply apply assembly lube to all the bearings, assembly lube to the camshaft, and we slip it in carefully without touching anything until it's in place. Then I like to put a super thin layer of gasket sealant on both sides of the gasket for the back cam plate. I like to wipe the inside edge clean with the rag. We don't want anything inside here. This is already beyond where the filter filters. Alright, we've installed our thrust plate and torqued it down to 190 inch-pounds. Okay, boom. Then we install our timing gear and we line this up with the little pin in the back. I etched it before we took it off around, so when you're holding it in place and you just bop it on with your little electric impact. This is only the 12 volt one. I wouldn't use a stronger one because you're going to push it on. At first, you're going to get it started by driving it, okay, just getting it tight so it's on there by hand, you know, so you know it's even, and then you're going to holding this in place while doing so. You'd probably be better off using a couple large washers instead of this, so it pushes evenly. Brain fart. We have reassembled, ensuring that them two dots are lined up when we install. And don't forget this main galley plug. Okay, so we tap it in lightly until it's flush all the way around the edges. We know it's even. This little 14 socket will drive it the rest of the way in. Okay, there you go. There was a tiny bit of gasket shellac around there, but once again, a tiny bit. We don't want that in our clean oil passage. With a dial indicator, we will make sure there is not more than 1/1000 of an inch play in and out. If you don't have that, you could put a feeler gauge in here and then pull it out and put a feeler gauge in there and subtract the difference. Now you'll notice the cam turns smoothly and evenly, and you could see the way the cam lines up in here. It's not exactly perfect the way you would expect these bearings to line up. The bearings are, just make sure they're not overlapping. Make sure they're making contact everywhere. Okay. Now don't get nervous. You could see that you see some people just use oil instead of assembly lube. Assembly lube is a little thicker, sticks to the parts better, but as soon as it heats up, it'll thin out like oil. So it's not like we're just putting heavy grease. It's really good to put on the cam lobes if you're not going to use it on the bearings. Like I said, it's thicker, it sticks to it. It's not very expensive. It's not like you could waste it. It'll stick in the lobes and make sure that everything's lubed on the first startup, even before, you know, even though we're going to prime everything. And when we do prime it, most of this assembly lube is going to wash out of any bearing journal surfaces, and I'll show you that after putting that in the hole there, the more I turn it, the more it's going to work its way down in there. And you can see as it starts to go down and fill the bearing surfaces with assembly lube, now it's hard to turn, so it'll feel like it's tight, but you just got to have a feel. You won't feel any grinding or binding. Before, when it was easy to turn, it's because I had already poured oil in the holes and washed it through just to double check. And then it spun freely. Now we're going to go ahead and wipe up these surfaces dry and install our bearings and our crankshaft. That was, of course, stored on its end, not laying on its side.